talk about Dr. Tennant's Raw Materials, otherwise known as Humic and Fulvic acids. My name is Scott Jessen. I'm the Director of Product Development. So diving into this is certainly more than a job for us. Everybody here knows that. It is our passion. As Janice said, we do go the extra mile to make sure that we have the best ingredients possible. They've saved my life, improved my life, my family's life, and each person on our current team. And we want to make sure that they're available not only to you, but to everyone else. We're still family owned and operated, and we want to make sure that we're giving you the best possible ingredients. So it's your life, it's your body, and ingredients do matter. As we look at today and what we're going to be covering, we're going to be talking about Dr. Tennant's Raw Materials. So in other words, that's humic and fulvic acids. We're going to talk about the nutritional value, food today, the role of humic and fulvic acid, what they do, kind of an overview of humic and fulvic, why bioavailability matters, and then how are they actually sourced? So where are we actually getting this? There's a distinguishing characteristic about our source for humic and fulvic here that I want to make sure that we can address. Humic and fulvic specifically, their biological functions, and then some of the products themselves. And then there's a lot of talk about fulvic and energy, and I wanted to highlight why we're actually talking about fulvic and energy and why it actually provides the energy that it does, and wrap it up with, because it does talk about energy, we're going to address the cell's powerhouse, ATP, or the mitochondrial focus. Fulvic really helps with that, so we'll dive into that. So quite a bit in a quick amount of time. I'm sure that there'll be some questions, so feel free to populate in the chat. All right, so let's dive into it. So, tasty foods. How many people have been to a farmer's market, gotten that, luscious, ripe apple or tomato? It's filled with color. It smells good. I mean, you can literally smell the apple or smell the tomato. It's full with color. You bite into it and has flavor, taste, an awesome smell, and it's just inviting. Any idea where those smells come from? And the flavor and the smell all come from the vitamins and minerals and the nutrients that are actually in there. So the interesting thing about that is that the nutritional values in the food actually come from the mineral content in the soil. And our bodies actually require those micro and trace nutrients. And that's part of the reason why when we smell those, why it piques our interest and causes us to be hungry or thirsty, or we want more of those things and to crave those things, because we want those vitamins, minerals, electrolytes that help replenish those body's nutrients. And what we found is that the U.S. Department of Agriculture does a study every year where they measure the nutritional value of the soil and in our food. And we found that not only does it vary all the way across the United States, depending on where you are, if you're in the city, if you're out in the suburbs, or if you're in the rural country, or if you're in Chicago, or if you're in New York, or if you're in, Lexington, Nebraska, in the middle of farm country. The common theme here is that we've realized that the nutritional value across the board has decreased. So if you think about going to the grocery store and buying that apple that looks absolutely amazing, and you bite into it and there's no flavor, it might have a good crunch, but it doesn't have a smell, it doesn't have a flavor. Same thing with that tomato. You pick it up, you look at it, you can almost see through it because it's clear. It's lacking that nutritional value. And in the USDA, these studies, they actually took a leaf of spinach from 1975, and it's actually equivalent to 10 leaves of spinach in 2018 when you actually compare those studies. But when we look at nutrients across the board, vitamin A is down 41%, sweet peppers are down, vitamin C is down 31%, watercress, iron is down 41%, broccoli, calcium, and vitamin A are down 50%. And these are all the nutrients that are in the soil. Well, those nutrients come from humic and fulvic acids. And so when we start talking about humic and fulvic acids and what their role is, we want to make sure that our bodies have those nutrients, and we need to get those from the soil. Unfortunately, they are decreasing. So when we look at our food today, we see that the current farming practices and their effort to, optimize agricultural production, there's a cost, right? So pesticides are used to make sure that you can maximize crops. You have the best looking crops. You're not going to lose additional crops. But the misnomer here is that organic farming and conventional farming still use pesticides. And those pesticides actually neutralize the soil or sterilize the soil and decrease the amount of nutrients overall. So what we're looking at is pesticides and GMO crops, or genetically modified crops, help to sterilize the micronutrients in the soil. This means that the fertilizers and the pesticides used in the agricultural practices destroy or severely stunt the growth of those microorganisms in humic and fulvic that produce humic and fulvic acids in the soil. So there was a presentation in the U.S. Senate report presented a couple of years ago that the U.S. crop plants only contain a fraction, sometimes up to 80% less of the humic and fulvic substances and the vitamins, minerals, and other nutrients compared to a century ago. So again, it's taking a look at the U.S. Department of Agriculture's nutritional data and how that's decreased, right? So when Grandma Nellie said, hey, I just used to eat my steak and veggies, you should be fine, that was fantastic for her, but it's not quite the case today. So when we talk about all of these things, we need to tie that back into humic and fulvic acids. And so what do humic and fulvic acids do? Well, humic and fulvic acids convert inorganic material to organic material so that they can be used by plants. And then this is kind of that cycle. So you take inorganic material, so we think about basically everything that's on the periodic table, and all of those elements, they need to be broken down into organic material so that plants can use them and that our bodies can use them. And so we have humic and fulvic acids that break down these nutrients, and then they take those micro and trace nutrients in the soil, they transport them throughout the plants and animals and humans. They help transport them throughout the plants themselves, and then when we as humans actually eat those plants, then they help transport the nutrients throughout our bodies. The cool thing about that is that this awesome cycle, when it works well and we have awesome nutritional food, then we're able to get those micro and trace nutrients. The downside of that is that if we're lacking the nutrients in the soil, even if we eat as much spinach as we can fit on the plate, we still may not be able to overcome that gap because we don't have those nutritional nutrients in the soil. That's where humic and fulvic come into play. So you say, okay, that's great, Scott, get it, but how does this all work? Well, let's take a look at humic and fulvic acid. So humic and fulvic convert inorganic material, basically everything on the periodic table, even the metals, into organic material so that our bodies can actually use them. The plants in our bodies can actually use them. Without humic and fulvic acids, this process would be impossible. So it's one of the miracles and really cool things in nature where we're actually able to process things we wouldn't be able to process otherwise. If we think about the biological role in the biological context, humic and fulvic play a critical role in biological health by providing those nutrients that are required, sometimes in like micro trace amounts, to create the new healthy cells. They also help transport them to each one of the cells. So humic is larger; it usually stays in the gut or in the intestines. Fulvic is actually about 10 times smaller, and it can actually go to every cell in the body. And then you say, okay, well, what are these micro and trace nutrients? If you've been with us for several years, you might remember a rainbow-colored label on a brown bottle that says up to 74 plus micro and trace nutrients. I came on board and I said, what are these? I have a family with allergies. I need to know everything that is in this. And our biochemist actually looked at me and she said, "List," and she holds up the periodic table. And she said, "It's essentially everything on the periodic table." And I said, "Well, what do you mean? Like, I don't understand. Like, aren't you putting this in there?" And she said, "No, these are actually the inorganic materials that are converted to organic materials in micro and trace amounts. So if you put them into a mass spectrometer, you're going to be able to see this, but otherwise, it's going to show up and present itself as humic and fulvic acids. These are the nutrients that our bodies need to process new healthy cells." All right. So then we get into the bioavailability. Well, I had mentioned without humic and fulvic, we wouldn't be able to actually use those inorganic materials. And so when humic and fulvic are not in the soils, then cell-ready minerals are not made available to plants, and then they're not in our food sources. So we want to make sure that we're able to supplement that in some form or fashion. The question is, Scott, I get it, right? You've been talking to me about, I need to make sure that I maximize my nutrition. I need those additional micro and trace nutrients. I get that. I need them for my new healthy cells. The question is, where do they come from, right? And the answer is a little bit complicated because it comes from concentrated humate, which is found all over the globe. But we actually get ours from the United States. Oftentimes, things that are sourced in the United States, when we talk about raw humate, can be populated with some heavy metals or pollutants. But there is one place in the United States that is free of that. And so we're actually sourcing this in North America from the Cretaceous period, and it's called the Fruitland Formation. So somewhere around the Four Corners, about 65 million years ago, the conditions were absolutely perfect to create the best raw humates in the world. So this area is in the northwest corner of New Mexico. It's during the Cretaceous period. And what we found is that some of the highest quality humate mineral ore is in this source in the world. There are millions of acres in this pristine area. It's far from civilization and pollution. The humate mineral ore that's carried is very high in fulvic acid concentration. One of the things that you'll find if you look at some of the other manufacturers who are producing humic and fulvic is that the fulvic concentrate or the amount and population of fulvic is on the low side. So it's usually about 10% fulvic, 90% humic is what you'll find most places. And we actually have a 70% fulvic to 30% humic ratio. We'll get into that a little bit later. But we found that there's a desirable mineral profile. It's essential mineral profile to help support optimal health. So it's a wide and balanced variety of these micro and trace nutrients. And it exceeds the benchmarks that have been set in the industry for superior quality. When we take a look at the actual raw material, test it to try and figure that out. And what we found is that there's a tremendous absence of heavy metals. And when we think about and read about some of the things that are happening with other sources across the globe and in the US, a lot of humic and fulvic in that raw humate form are surrounded with heavy metals. So you say, okay, well, that's great, Scott, but then how are they processed? How are you actually creating these and sourcing the humic and fulvic? Well, our humates carry a high concentration of fulvic acid. We blend it in a super concentrated to achieve a 70 to 30 ratio of fulvic to humic. And that's the raw material formula, right? So we have our fulvic super concentrate, which is just the fulvic, and then we also have the raw materials, which is actually the 70-30 ratio that I was talking about. The majority of the other folks on the market are actually 10 to 90. So it's kind of interesting when we take a look at this. Now let's look at how it actually functions. Most folks will throw humic and fulvic into the same group. Well, humic is just a larger group of all of these molecules. And so fulvic is a subset of that. And when we take a look at it specifically, humic acids are larger molecules. So they're actually large enough they can actually penetrate the intestinal wall. So they can act as fiber. They can act as a great resource for helping promote intestinal health. They're often dark in color, almost black, right? So if you look up or you Google images of humic acid, you're going to find like a dark image of dark soil with somebody holding a plant, typically. And humic acids are not water soluble, and they really like alkaline conditions. So they have a very high pH and contain really high energy. And so the cool thing about their molecular structure is that they can actually donate or receive electrons. Now, this is fantastic if you're trying to deal with voltage and increase your voltage, or help detox, because they can actually pick things up and then help carry them throughout the body, which our bodies aren't necessarily very good at. And so one of the huge benefits is that humic acids can be thought of as a transportation system to help carry those nutrients throughout the body from cell to cell, or in plants. I mean, essentially they're in plants and then we eat the plants and then we carry them from cell to cell. And again, when we actually talk about the concentration, we want to make sure that the concentration is appropriate. Now, if we dive into fulvic acids are much smaller than humic. So and depending on the molecule, it can be 10 to 100 times smaller than a fulvic acid molecule. This means that fulvic is going to be able to get into every cell. So if you think about something and you're trying to figure out how to detox or how to increase the energy in somebody specifically, and you want to be able to carry those nutrients or exactly what the cell might need to every cell, fulvic is a great way to do that, because they're so much smaller than humic. And when they can get where they need to go and they're able to transport those nutrients, you're going to have better cell function. Fulvic acids are also soluble in water, and at all pH levels, unlike humic and fulvic, which are only available in alkaline solutions. So when you combine the two and you have humic on one side, fulvic on the other, you're able to get a pretty broad range of spectrum to help replace those nutrients. That's why they're paired together quite often. So fulvic are formed in a similar fashion, right, through the microbial decay, but they're a lot more biologically active. So when we start talking about energy, now we have a nutrient that can actually help transport other nutrients directly to the cell, and it's highly active. And so the cool thing with this is that it helps increase energy directly to the cell. And this is because fulvic actually has almost twice the oxygen level of humic acid. So when you look at the molecule itself, there's significantly more oxygen. And one of the benefits when we take a look at this is it has those abilities to transfer all of those specific nutrients straight to the cell. And it takes that high energy right to the cell. When we take a look at the concentration of fulvic, when we compare that, it's a light amber color. So oftentimes you're going to see dark black liquid for humic and like a light amber color for fulvic. When you look at the concentration, the industry's average concentration for fulvic acid is about 3% concentrated solution. Our solution, or Dr. Tennant's fulvic super concentrate, consistently tests between 12 and 14% concentration. Now, we just leave it on the label and say that it's over 10, but ever since its existence, it's consistently testing significantly higher, and this is because of the purity of the source. So what are some of the biological functions? Well, we've talked about this just briefly, but it transports those vitamins and nutrients, right? So especially those trace nutrients that are missing from our foods. We started off talking about foods and how we need to be able to help increase the nutritional value of foods and those vitamins, minerals, and trace nutrients. we can actually increase those through raw materials, or otherwise known as humic and fulvic. But our cells need these, and almost every cell in the body actually needs these micro and trace nutrients. And so, in order to be able to create new healthy cells, we need so many different things. And unfortunately, this is one of the few things, the humic and fulvic, one of the few things that don't actually sit well in a shelf in a canister of a store. And so that's why the humic and fulvic acids are actually outside the canister of the store. But they do work really, really well, and one of the few things that our bodies actually need. When you start talking about intestinal integrity, humic acid is absolutely fantastic. And this is because it not only works inside the intestinal wall and helps heal those tight endothelial junctions to make sure it can help with, let's say leaky gut or the intestinal permeability, but it also works as a fiber supplement. And then the molecular structure of this works to help detox, because remember, it can donate or receive electrons. It can actually pick up additional toxins and help move them outside of the body. So when we start talking about digestion support, it all kind of ties in, goes hand in hand, that humic is a much needed fiber support that's missing in most diets. And you'll notice that there's a note on humic and fulvic that says, hey, if you're taking something with humic, start off slowly, because it can act as a fiber supplement, which can increase the amount of stool in a person, increase the amount of stool activity, let's just say, in a person's body. And so we want to make sure that everybody's aware of what's actually happening with that, but then it also carries those detoxification traits to help and help manage the microbial balance between good bacteria, plant-based nutrition, and help remove, candida and viruses and several other types of things in the intestinal tract. So what are we actually talking about? Well, we have Dr. Tennant's Raw Materials. We have the liquid form. The liquid form and the capsule form are the same. The difference is the liquid form can be microdosed, or if you think back a couple of years and what was happening with the Tennant Institute, they would actually give you the raw materials liquid. You drop that into a gallon, and then you can use that as a detoxification solution. So why do we even have this product? Well, we have the product because humic and fulvic help replace those micronutrients that are found in the soil. So that's the problem. This is the solution. We need to replace the additional micro and trace nutrients throughout our body, and then it helps transport minerals and nutrients throughout the body. And it's an incredibly powerful antioxidant. The cool thing is, and I keep going back to this, but it's one of those things that really stands out in that its molecular structure works almost as a binder to be able to help attract things and help carry it throughout the body. The liquid is awesome because you can microdose it if you need to. On a personal note, my son was having some negative reactions to a vaccine, and his pediatrician actually recommended humic and fulvic to help him detox from that, because it would help remove some of the toxins and some of the toxins and some of the heavy metals. And so she actually recommended it, and she said, hey, you can actually give 2 or 3 drops, whatever it was at the time, for him, and so you can actually change that dosing depending on how much you may actually need. Then we have our capsules. So the capsules are the exact same formula. They carry the same quantities per serving of the humic and fulvic. They're just in a capsule. So it's a lot easier to transport, especially if you're traveling, or just for daily maintenance and you don't actually want to take a dropper full of liquid. And then it still carries those same functions, right? So we talked about transporting things. We talked about detoxing. But then it's also the biological function. So it's going to help support that healthy GI microbial balance, help restore those tight junctions, right? And the biochemical redox. It helps promote with cellular energy. We'll get to that here in just a moment. Helps with free radicals, and then really helps bind to heavy metals and toxins to help safely eliminate them from the body. So we have the raw materials that are available in both liquid and capsule form. Again, the raw materials are both humic and fulvic. And then we also have Dr. Tennant's fulvic super concentrate. Now, Dr. Tennant will refer to this as the spark of life, or our body's supplied energy, or bodies that work on supplied energy, and they need some additional assistance with this, and so we need to be able to increase our energy. One of the great ways to do that is through fulvic, and again, that's because of its high energy content. But our fulvic super concentrate is a professional strength plant-derived antioxidant with full spectrum of ionic minerals and electrolytes. Again, the key thing here, it's small enough to get to every cell. So it's high energy, high nutrient potential, works well to help detox. So you're going to have new healthy cells. You can help clean out those cells, and it's going to take that energy straight into the cell. Because it does that, it helps supercharge the energy production, and then it helps detox naturally and organically over time. I had to have some dental work done because I had a couple of root canals, and I started taking fulvic super concentrate for quite a while, and as we do, I got lazy. I stopped taking it. Several days later, I noticed that my energy started to go down, and I started to feel a little bit off, and like something is just missing. I'm not quite sure what's happening, and I would put a couple of droppers into a large glass of water and sip it throughout the day. I went into my dentist, who happened to be a biological dentist. I was learning about this at the time, and he tested my heavy metals and mercury levels, and it was off the charts. And he said, look, we need to take care of this stuff now, and you really need to be on something to help remove this from your body. He said, are you doing anything with humic or fulvic? And I said, well, I have been taking a fulvic super concentrate. It's a concentrated fulvic product. And he's like, that sounds awesome. He was familiar with Dr. Tennant. He said, well, go ahead and start taking that again. I started to get back on that, and all of a sudden, my energy was back up. About a month later, I ended up getting the metal out of my mouth, and everything kind of balanced out again. But what I'm realizing is that I got to see the personal effects of how that actually worked out well with some detox and helping with some heavy metals. So then we start talking about humic and fulvic, and that they actually provide energy. Well, cellular energetics is one of the things that Dr. Tennant talks about quite a bit. But the thing that's really cool about this is humic and fulvic that we're actually using exceed the benchmarks of humic and fulvic in the industry. And so we actually have a superior nutritional product that helps transport a highly energetic, electron-rich, and highly oxygenated, difficult to say, nutrients all straight to the cell. And so this is when we start talking about improving energy and improving energetics, and what we actually need in that process. Humic and fulvic are absolutely tremendous at doing that. So why is it important? Well, we know that raw materials are referred to as the spark of life. We know that our bodies work on supplied energy. Not only do they require nutrients to make that energy, which humic and fulvic deliver, but they also require some specific voltage at the cellular level to help refuel that process. And humic and fulvic also kind of replace that. So sometimes referred to, they act as mini batteries, right, which help supply electrons to the cells. But they also help maintain the cell's electrical charge, and they help maintain the cell membrane in addition to its integrity and carrying nutrients and then detoxing. So when we look at this whole thing, you think, well, oh my gosh, how can you not have humic and fulvic acids in your diet? And this is why it's a complicated process. It's a complicated thing to understand, but once you get it, It's it's like the light just went on. And so when we talk about humic and fulvic, it all comes down to keeping your energy up. And I put this picture on here um, because, as most of you know, I was sick several years ago, um, and I ended up with all kinds of additional things that I needed to have that processed through my body. But energy and low energy was significant. Was one of the things that I struggled with, and I continue to use Fulvic Super Concentrate in my water bottles as I cycle. And a couple of weeks ago, I was actually able to do a bucket list ride where I rode from my house to one of the local mountains, up the mountain, and then back down to the beach. And it's all because we're able to provide the right energy, the right amount of natural detox, and provide exactly what cells need to function. And so Humic and Fulvic were, I believe, absolutely pivotal in my recovery and helping maintain that energy across the board. The other thing that's interesting is that we have a couple of studies, and I wanted to throw this in here too, is that research suggests that humic and fulvic acids and some other plant-derived substances work to help increase the levels of CoQ10 in the mitochondria. In other words, it helps produce more CoQ10, it helps increase your energy, and it will help the body heal itself. And Dr. Tennant says that the body never forgets how to heal itself, and when it does correct, and when it runs correctly, it does heal itself. I'm a firm believer of this. I've experienced that. And humic and fulvic acids were all part of my and my family's adventure. And we've continued to see that over the years as we continue to work with and talk with other folks.